Hey guys, I just want to do another little video where we're just talking a little bit about sort of the big picture of the book of John, trying to help you put it all together. And like I said in another video, it's really important for us to get a good understanding of sort of the geography of where different things are taking place in the book to kind of understand what Jesus is doing. Where he's at in the book of John really influences the plot of what's happening. And so instead of taking a lot of time in sermons to really dig into this stuff, I thought it would be helpful to make some videos where that you could watch maybe at home or maybe in your community groups even or something to just kind of help give you a little bit of a big picture understanding of what's taking place in John and give you some of that context that I think is really important, but maybe in a, turning a sermon into a history lecture is not always the most helpful thing for everybody. And if this is really your thing, you can kind of dig in here, and hopefully this is helpful for you. So let's just talk a little bit about what takes place when in the book of John. I have a little map here that I'm just going to walk through in the video. I'm just going to walk through sort of chapter by chapter or sort of episode by episode in the book of John, because John will tell some stories that take place over several chapters in one location. And sometimes it's easy to get lost in that a little bit, especially when we're used to reading in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which move more rapidly and aren't always as specific in telling us exactly where something is taking place. All right, so go ahead and I'll look on the screen right in front of you, and I'll try to get you some stuff here. All right, so the book of John, as you can see, takes place in all throughout just Palestine. I have a map here, and you see in the south you have Judea, in the kind of the middle region you have Samaria, and in the north you have Galilee. These three regions are all places that Jesus goes and has at least some time spent with people from these areas. And as you can see, he moves quite a bit in the book of John. These arrows represent all the different places he travels in the book, which takes place around, it's hard to know for sure, but because John is kind of precise in telling us when Jesus is going a certain place for a certain festival, we know it takes place over a time span of around 3 years or so. Let's just start at the beginning. So after a little prologue to the book, in verses John chapter 1 verses 1 to 18, we find ourselves in sort of the wilderness in Judea, and I have a little blue circle here that you see. That's not exactly where Jesus and John the Baptist are hanging out at when we first meet them. We don't actually know, so I just guessed and put a circle there. So let's just assume they start there. This is where we meet John the Baptist. Jesus shows up. And he finds some of his first disciples. Then, after he's done there, Jesus moves up to Cana, which is up in the northern part of ancient Palestine, up in the region of Galilee. He goes to a wedding where he turns water into wine. We're told he heads to Capernaum. It's just for one verse. And then he heads down to the southern part of Israel, where he goes to the region of Judea, which is primarily swallowed up by what's going on in Jerusalem. This is where he goes down for a Passover festival. There's what we call the temple action, where he kind of throws down in the temple with the leaders there, and then he has the really famous visit in chapter 3 with Nicodemus. After Jesus is done in Jerusalem, he heads back up into the wilderness to do some baptizing. Then he heads to Samaria, where he has, again, a very famous chapter-long encounter with a Samaritan woman. And this is about the only time that he really spends specifically in Samaria. He then heads back up to Cana, where he heals an official's son. And then after he's done in Cana, he heads back down to Jerusalem for another festival. A trip from Galilee down to Jerusalem was about a 3-day journey as the crow flies. If you went in a straight line and traveled through Samaria, people didn't always travel by land. Sometimes you might take a boat down the side of the Mediterranean Sea. You'd maybe get in at Caesarea and take it down to Joppa or Gaza or something, and then walk over to Jerusalem. But Jesus typically goes north and south through Samaria, it seems like, or through the wilderness, kind of along the Jordan River, which is the river that connects the Sea of Galilee in the north and the Dead Sea in the south. Jesus heals a man at a pool down there. He encounters some Jewish leaders. And then he decides to head back up to Galilee again. This is in chapter 6. He feeds 5,000 people on the far side of Galilee. This is where he walks on water. And then he immediately after heads to Capernaum, where he kind of picks up on some teaching about the bread and the 5,000. Actually makes some people angry, and some disciples leave him. And then he heads down to Jerusalem from chapter 7 all the way towards the end of chapter 10. So it's a really long period of time that Jesus is down there, and it's basically one complete story. There's really not any major breaks in time. And Jesus secretly goes down there for the Festival of Tabernacles, and he spends a lot of time in confrontation with Jewish leaders down there, including where he kind of reaches like a pinnacle of confrontation. This is in chapter 8 primarily, where he says some stuff that is just so offensive that like they get ready to attack him. Like they're ready to kill him. They pick up stones to kill him, but Jesus is able to escape. After he escapes, he heals a blind man, and then there's another festival, the Festival of Dedication. So because Jerusalem is sort of like really not a very safe place for Jesus to be hanging out in after he really makes a lot of people angry in chapter 8, he leaves Jerusalem and kind of heads back to the wilderness in Judea. It actually says he goes across the Jordan, which means maybe this map's not 100% accurate. It might actually be better to have drawn him going to the other side of the Jordan River, but it's because he's doing some baptizing up there, it looks like. Okay, so after he's done there, he travels down to Bethany, which is just a little ways away from Jerusalem, because his friend Lazarus has died, and Jesus raises him from the dead. Now, this is sort of the turning point in the book of John, because this is where the Jewish leaders decide, hey, this guy just raised somebody from the dead, and if we don't do something to stop him, we're going to lose all of our power. And so they decide we're going to kill him. So it's really the raising of Lazarus that in the book of John that is sort of the moment where Jesus needs to die. And we know that as we enter into chapter 12, which is kind of where the book largely finishes, from chapter 12 all the way to the end of chapter 20. This is where Jesus triumphantly enters Jerusalem as Messiah. He has a 4-chapter-long farewell discourse with his disciples. He's then betrayed, has a trial before the chief priest and Pilate, who's the Roman governor that oversees Judea. He is crucified. He rises again from the dead. John tells us about several appearances that Jesus has after his resurrection. And then finally, a sort of an epilogue to the book of John. It's really a really cool, I think, way to end the book. Jesus heads back all the way. Some time takes place. We don't know how much, but some time takes place, and Jesus heads back up to the north, up to Galilee again. And we just know he's hanging out right next to the Sea of Galilee on the shore. His disciples are doing some fishing, and he has this really intimate sort of final conversation with Peter, where he reconciles with Peter after Peter has sort of betrayed Jesus by not being willing to associate with him which happens a little bit earlier, right before his crucifixion. And it's a sort of like intimate sort of cap to the book of John, and I love it. I'm so excited to preach through that. So yeah, this is what we get in the book of John, and we see Jesus treks around quite a bit. He doesn't like to sit still in the book of John, and so I hope that's helpful for you as we walk through the book of John as a church, for you to sort of get a good understanding of sort of what's going on, where it's taking place, how far it would take, or it would be to travel from one place to another, how long it would take to get there. I hope for those of you who this helps you to learn a little bit more, I hope this is helpful for you as we walk through the book of John together as a church.